Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Red, yellow, and green bell peppers are all the same type of pepper. They're just at different stages of ripeness. Don't let that throw you off the scent of the situation. This is actually going to be a nice show. Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Calm Caleb. And today we're going to start off with a bunch of stories centralized around one nice, beautiful theme: mistakes. My favorite from that bunch includes a man who got attacked by a gator and a shark. If you couldn't tell, that's my Florida story of the week. Another one from that group is that in a freak boating accident, an anchor slingshotted across the water and killed the captain of the boat. After a few more of those type stories, we're going to move into some heroic stories. In that section, we'll talk about a man from Cuba who donned a full-body cardboard shield against coronavirus, claiming that it was his home and therefore he could walk around in it. That's my idea of a hero. Complete nutcase. In the third segment, we're going to do some random weird news stories, including a puppy who has a tail on his forehead that makes him look like a unicorn. Quite adorable. And we are going to wrap up with my top 10 historical mistakes. It's kind of going to be along the vein of, producers turning down the Beatles and picking up the tambourines or whatever they're called. They'll be like that kind of story, except possibly even more interesting, actually almost certainly, because instead of focusing on monetary losses, we're going to largely focus on death, destruction, mass crises. So we'll get into that, but for now, let's start off with our first mistake story. And this is that a Florida man who survived a gator bite was attacked by a shark. Now, you're probably thinking at the current moment that this is not in fact a mistake. Well, I think it's a mistake because he lives in Florida, making him 100% responsible for his resulting injuries. Anyway, this young man, we'll name him because he's quite proud of this. His name is Justin Stoller. And last week, Justin Stoller brought his family to the Florida Keys in order to catch some spiny lobsters as part of a mini-season. And he gave his family an experience they'll never forget, to give the man credit, because eventually he was attacked by an 8-foot-long lemon shark. Justin Stoller said the attack started while he dove down to some rocks in order to retrieve an injured fish. Quote, "I put the fish in a hole right before I surfaced, and wham! I felt the skin more than the shark. It rolled me over and I saw it swimming away." He then claims that despite the gaping wound in his leg, he managed to swim back to the surface and alert his family and his fishing buddies to get out of the water. Thankfully, everybody got back on the boat safely and the man's leg was treated with all first aid measures possible. Justin said, quote, "I tied it off and actually lost very little blood. It was pretty deep, but no bone. I was very lucky. No tendons." Eventually, Justin was transferred to a hospital where his care needs were fulfilled. When interviewed by local news, they asked him whether or not he'll be going back to the water to continue his fisherman lifestyle. And Justin said, "Of course, I've been attacked by a gator before." He said, quote, "I was bit by the gator, and as he rolled, he kind of clamped on my leg, you know? One good clamp, and then one real good clamp." I would have read that in a stoner voice, but I believe my voice is already close enough to a stoner voice that I don't have to modify it whatsoever. Keep that in mind when I read his next quote. Quote, "I mean, a lot worse things that could happen in those cases, in my opinion. That doesn't make sense at all. It was as good of a bad experience as you could have, I would say. He should be a poet, because I don't understand him and I don't understand poetry, so perhaps he'd be good at it. Okay, time to move on. This next mistake is about a library book that was returned overdue after 43 years. This happened in Monroeville, Pennsylvania. We'll keep this one short, don't worry. The book was originally due to be returned August 4th, 1977, and was in fact returned August 4th, 2020. Thankfully for this young man, the Monroeville Library is a fine-fee library, so he did not have to pay the $1,500 fine that would have accrued over a 43-year period. Alright, so that was a nice short and sweet mistake story. We're going to move on to another Pennsylvania story, where a woman was charged last Wednesday with hiding her grandma's remains in her freezer so that her grandmother's Social Security checks would continue to come in. State police say that the 61-year-old granddaughter said that she found her grandmother dead in their home nearly 16 years ago, and thought immediately that the best place to keep her was in the basement freezer. The woman was then charged with abuse of a corpse, theft, and receiving stolen property. Now, I'm kind of confused as to why she told the police that she was saving the body for Social Security payment needs. She could have just said that she was inspired by Walt Disney's family, so she locked her old grandma up in the freezer so she could revive her one day. I think that's a much more plausible alibi. But anyway, this young lady, well, the 61-year-old lady, will find herself in front of a jury of her peers, and all will be revealed. Seems like a bit of a mistake on her part. Okay, freak boating accident. An anchor slingshots from the water, killing the captain of the vessel. This occurred in the state of Missouri, and began while an Illinois man was anchored in a cove in a 20-mile-wide lake. At around 5 p.m., the man and his group reportedly began to leave the cove. However, they forgot to pull up the anchor before they did so. Witnesses watching the incident said that they were trying to alert the boater that they were pulling something in the water, but they had no success, and the other boat simply waved back at them. As the vessel gained speed, so did the anchor, and the anchor tension began to grow and grow. Eventually, the boat was going fast enough that the anchor broke through the surface of the water. The tension was released, and it slingshotted across the water, where it landed on the driver's head, which killed him instantly. It's noted that they tried to perform CPR on this man, but his face was smashed in, so I don't know if giving him more oxygen is really what he needed. I'm going to try to not make too many jokes about this one, because it's obviously kind of sad. However, I will say that if you can still move your boat after being anchored, in fact reach top speed with your anchor is not doing his job, buddy. No, but really it is sad, and my thoughts and prayers go out to this family. Well, my thoughts do. My prayers are all selfish. They're for me and nobody else. Okay, so that was my penultimate mistake story. Now we're going to move on to one that I can sympathize with, and I'll tell you why later. But it's the fact that people are dying after drinking hand sanitizer. Now, I better start off this story by saying that it comes from CNN. I know we make a promise every episode that none of our stories come from CNN or Fox. But this is just such a beautiful story, I couldn't pass up on it. And where does CNN get this article from? The CDC, who last Wednesday sent out a PSA saying, "Don't drink hand sanitizer. People are getting sick and even dying of it." In fact, 4 people died, and others have suffered impaired vision and seizures. Now, of course, they put along with this PSA that hand sanitizer is incredibly important during these hard times, but that does not mean that it is safe to swallow. Quote, "Alcohol-based hand sanitizer products should never be ingested." Over the past month alone, 15 adults in Arizona and New Mexico have been hospitalized after consuming the methanol poison in the alcohol-based hand sanitizers. When asked what might cause this, the CDC said, quote, "We're not sure why people might drink hand sanitizer." Children might do it by mistake, and some people might think it's a good substitute for alcohol. It is not. I like how they're comparing these people who are dying in hospitals to children and alcoholics. I don't know, maybe they are. Maybe they're both. Maybe they are children and alcoholics. So they go on to explain the science behind why you shouldn't ingest hand sanitizer. Basically, there are multiple kinds of alcohol. One of them is ethanol, and that's what you drink. And there is one called methanol, which is toxic, which is what hand sanitizer is made of. This is where the confusion begins for me, because I remember the CDC putting out an article saying that, oh, if you don't have hand sanitizer because it's all sold out, why not use Tito's vodka on your hands? So my basic assumption is that people said, well, hand sanitizer and Tito's vodka are so similar that one can replace the other. I bet it works vice versa. If you can use Tito's in order to wash your hands, you can drink hand sanitizer. My guess is that that's where they're coming from. I'm kind of surprised that these people weren't deterred by the immense stinging pain you get from drinking hand sanitizer. I remember as a kid, I would just wash my hands in hand sanitizer, and if I went to rub my eyes, like 30 seconds later, I would still feel the burn. I believe it's 99.9% alcohol or whatever the hell. So I'm just surprised these people got it down their throats. Anyway, now the sad part. There were 6 seizures and 4 deaths as a result of this pandemic. They call it a pandemic. In total, there were 62 call records sent to the CDC between May and June, characterizing cases that would be labeled methanol poisoning from alcohol-based hand sanitizers. The CDC researchers found that the cases ranged from age 21 to 65, and although they were all admitted to a hospital after ingesting the hand sanitizer, 6 of them developed seizures, and 3 were discharged with visual impairments. The CDC report says, quote, "This investigation highlights the serious adverse health effects, including death, that can occur after ingesting alcohol-based hand sanitizer products containing methanol. Safety messaging to avoid ingestion of any alcohol-based hand sanitizer products should continue. Young children might unintentionally swallow these products, whereas adolescent or adults with history of alcohol use disorder might intentionally swallow these products as an alcohol substitute." Which is basically the case I made earlier. However, I don't think they should drag children into this. Oh, the children might swallow this substance that's incredibly painful to swallow. I think kids are too smart, too reactionary to fall for this, to drink hand sanitizer. And the statistics weigh against that too, being that every single person was between the age of 21 and 65. Now, this is why I'm not a fan of some of these agencies. They went on to say, quote, "For their health and safety, we urge consumers to immediately stop using all hand sanitizers on the FDA's list of dangerous hand sanitizer products." Now, it's no secret that I'm no fan of the FDA. It probably has something to do with the fact that I'm a radical nut. But I don't think you should be worried about whether or not your hand sanitizer contains methanol or ethanol. Just for the love of God, don't drink your hand sanitizer. I don't think we have to make all methanol hand sanitizer illegal because there were a bunch of unfortunate incidents. 15 unfortunate incidents in the Midwest. We just need to educate people better and hopefully prevent future cases rather than banning a substance altogether, which saves probably hundreds or thousands of lives a year, and certainly more than that during these hard times. Stay tuned for the next segment. We're going to go into a few heroic stories, including 3 men who were rescued from a Pacific island after writing SOS on the sand. That actually worked. These are some uplifting stories, so stay tuned. And we'll even get to the one where a Cuban dons a full-body cardboard shield against the coronavirus, claiming that it's his home. Stay tuned for that.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the I have to do a fact. The world's largest onion only weighs about 1/3 the world's largest breast. I made that fact up on my own. I just did some quick math, but it's true. Anyways, this isn't the podcast where you go for the truth. This is the podcast where you go to hear about some heroic god-dang stories, and I have some heroic god-dang stories, including one in which 3 men were rescued from a Pacific island after writing SOS in the sand. This happened on a Pacific island, as previously mentioned, near New Zealand. The signal was written by 3 men who were missing for 3 days. Their distress signal was eventually spotted last Sunday on the otherwise uninhabited island by searchers on an Australian and US aircraft. These 3 men's journey began when they set sail in a 7-meter or 23-foot-long boat on July 30th. They intended to travel 27 miles to Palap when they unfortunately sailed off course and ran out of fuel. That is just terrifying to imagine. Searchers in Guam were aware that the 3 men were on a boat headed for the island, and as a result they asked the Australians for help in finding them. As a result, they sent an entire military ship after the 3 men, and they also helped the U.S. government search. So no compromises were taken in finding these 3 lost men. They were eventually found 118 miles from where they had set out, and thankfully, since it had only been 3 days, they were found in good condition. There were no storms, and they had some water left on their boat. However, they were just about to run out once help arrived, and they were immediately given food and water. The commanding officer of the military ship said, quote, "I am proud of the response and professionalism of all on board as we fulfill our obligation to contribute to the safety of life at sea wherever we are in the world." It was a plane that found them, but whatever. The commanding officer, Captain Terry Morrison, he can have his moment. Now I'm going to finish by directly quoting this article. SOS is an internationally recognized distress signal that originates from Morse code. That's the last sentence. So if you ever get stuck on an island, just write SOS. Make sure it's written really big though, like 72-point font big at least. That way people from aeroplanes will say, hey look, there's some children that need some help. Let's radio down for landing. Okay, next heroic story. A Tanzanian miner earns millions of dollars after finding 3 rocks. That's my cynical approach to this article's title. Anyways, Tanzania is a country in East Africa not known for being entirely wealthy, which is why I think it's cool that this man found millions of dollars simply in his mining efforts. The man became an overnight millionaire in June for selling 2 rough tanzanite stones valued at $3.4 million, and he just sold another gem for $2 million. This 3rd stone is said to have weighed 14 pounds. That is a big gem. Tanzanite is only found in Tanzania, which is used to make ornaments. It sounds like the plot of a superhero movie, doesn't it? Tanzanite is only found in Tanzania. It is said to be one of the rarest gemstones on Earth, and many geologists say that the estimated supply may have been completely exhausted within the next 20 years. The man eventually sold these gems to his own local government for the aforementioned price, which is actually kind of sad. I think they should be reallocating $6 million worth of gem money to perhaps feeding the poor, but whatever. He said, quote, selling to the government means there are no shortcuts. They are transparent. Now, this is a hard-working man. It should be noted that he is a father of more than 30 children, which is just an unbelievably impressive number. I can only assume that he puts the same amount of effort into his mining that he does into, human production. Originally, after finding the rocks and notifying local news, he told them that he would, quote, hold a party. But last Monday, he said that the money will instead be used to build a school and a health facility in his community in the northern Manura region. He went on to say that this will not change his lifestyle and that he plans to continue looking after his 2,000 cows, adding that he did not need to take any extra precautions despite his newfound riches. He has 30 children, 2,000 cows, and he's richer than his entire town combined. So, it sounds like an old biblical character, doesn't he? In all seriousness, though, I'm very happy for this young man with 30 children. It's really cool that he's using this money to build a school and a health facility, and hopefully it'll inspire more people in the region to go out and make wealth where there appears to be none. So, best of luck to him. Alright, next heroic story. A coyote is found with his head stuck in a glass jar. So I'm going to start off by reassuring you that although he was not enjoying having a glass jar on his head, he wasn't starving or dying of thirst or anything like that. My theory is that once he got his head stuck in the jar, he eventually ate everything that was in the jar, so he had plenty to eat while his head was stuck in there. It's kind of cute, but kind of sad at the same time. Anyway, a passerby notified the local conservation officer services, who responded immediately. Of course, they recorded the whole thing on video, so you can go and watch it. They play manipulative music over it. It's beautiful. It's only about a minute long. It just shows the nice lady using lotion to gently remove the glass jar from the animal's face. And it actually looks pretty difficult. He went in deep, for sure. It's pretty amazing he didn't know he would get stuck. I think we should use the same thing on children. Use cookie jars that are just barely too small for their hands. So that way it's like, did you eat the cookies in the cookie jar? And then the child says, no. And then he has like a big jar on his hand. Anyways, in order to get the coyote in their hands, the officers had to tranquilize him. And during the actual procedure, they poured water over him to keep him cool. Once the jar was removed, they checked the animal's body for injuries, and thankfully only found several marks on his head from the jar, and he was in otherwise healthy condition. Like I said, he had plenty of food to eat. They made sure to stay around to make sure the coyote gained mobility before they left, probably because they get paid hourly. The officers say that it is not certain how long the animal had the jar stuck on his head, but it could have been as long as a couple of days. That's so sad. He probably didn't get along with any of his friends while he had it stuck on his head. They probably just all laughed at him like coyotes do. Talk about a lone wolf. Anyways, the BC Conservation Officer Services said that they have about 1,100 reports regarding coyotes every year, but that is mostly on charge of the animals being aggressive and showing a lack of fear of people and pets. Anyways, when the people left, they said, quote, he was doing well when we left. Alright, we're gonna move on to my next heroic story. A Cuban man dons full-body cardboard shield against coronavirus. So this man is 82 years old, and he decided to build and wear a mobile housing unit out of cardboard in order to shield himself from the virus, because he says it is, quote, particularly deadly to seniors, which is of course true, and he also had growing concerns due to the fact that in Cuba, there is very little to none personal protective equipment that is sold at stores. So this man felt it was up to him to take his safety into his own hands, which is beautiful. Anyway, Cuba's coronavirus slogan is, quote, stay at home. And the man wrote on his cardboard box, quote, I am at home, what about you? So he's not too happy with the Cuban government at the moment, it seems. Anyway, this person's daughters both live in the United States, which is why they find themselves going to the store by themselves, resorting to humor to keep Cuban authorities at bay. She is now a celebrity, so it wouldn't be so great if she ended up in prison for what she's doing, or fined for what she's doing, and she's a bit elderly, so she's gained a lot of sympathy from the local people, and it would be a big mistake for the government to fine or jail her, not to mention immoral. Anyway, she says, quote, "I was worried about the asymptomatic cases who could cough just as I passed, so I thought, I'll do a little house with a cardboard box and wear it." She is a retired nurse who salvaged the box from her local pharmacy, cutting armholes and a window for her face. The rest is covered in clear plastic. She even attached a cake box to the top of it to make it look like a house roof. One of her neighbors laughed and said, quote, "She's very creative. In the midst of this pandemic, this stress and anxiety all the time, her little home makes me laugh." Which is beautiful. Nice little heroic story coming to you from the Cuban Isles. Okay, time for our next heroic story, our final heroic story. Sausage vending machines booming in Germany. For those who don't know, the Germans like sausages, which is great. Who doesn't like sausages? I think this is a heroic story. Anyways, it turns out the most popular time for the vending machines to sell their bratwursts is around midnight. They're good midnight snacking machines, apparently. According to the German government, they are, quote, booming outside of German cities where shops are less likely to stay open for long hours. Especially in structurally weak rural areas, vending machine solutions are becoming increasingly popular. There is a strong development towards the vending machine, which is used to deliver meat, milk, eggs, and other products to customers outside of core opening times. So this is all a result of the pandemic, obviously, because the food stores are closing earlier, and since people are still working in Germany, they sometimes work past the butcher's hours, and so they resort to meat vending machines, which is just a beautiful thing. It should be noted that they don't only stock meat, they also stock eggs, milk, butter, and fruit, and sometimes even vegetables. There are 570,000 of these machines in Germany, but despite their popularity, they are expected to complement rather than replace traditional shops, typically operating in areas where shops are not economically viable. Wolfgang Kampmeyer of the Berlin Brandenburg Trade Association said, quote, vending machines will play a complementary role in brick-and-mortar retailing. Now, this article ends by relating to these unusual vending machines to the ones that have existed for a very long time in Japan, which I think is a funny comparison. I don't know if you guys are history buffs or not, but other things Germany and Japan have in common are not well looked upon in history. I just hope nobody ever tells a German that third time's the charm. Anyways, alright, we're gonna move on to a bunch of random stories next, right after this quick short break, including a real-life Breaking Bad scenario, and a man who was missing for 5 years being found in a forest. Then we're going to finish up that segment with a puppy who is being compared to a unicorn due to the fact that he has a tail on his head. And after that, we're going to get into my final segment, in which I will give you my top 10 historical mistakes. We will get to that after the break. Stay tuned.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
You can use a slice of cucumber in order to clean your faucets, sinks, and stainless steel appliances. It is economically viable and will not leave any residue, but it will make you look like an idiot. Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. I'm giving you a bunch of vegetable facts this week, because I figure vegetables have to be good for something, so why not facts? Maybe that's why. Anyways, we just got done talking about some goddamn sausage machines in Germany. A beautiful story. Sausages are my favorite food just because they're like 7 foods just blended and wrapped into one. The problem is my second favorite food is like cashews. And so it was a rough day for me when I realized that my main diet consists of sausage and nuts. Anyways, I should probably just cut this out. I'm talking about this because dynamite was found in a car over the weekend, but it turned out just to be a beef stick. This occurred in the great state of Kansas, and the situation climaxed as first responders were called to the report of an explosive in a car. The incident occurred around 4:45 p.m. last Wednesday, and the request for a response team resulted in the Greensburg police, firefighters, and deputies all responding at once to what was reported to be a stick of dynamite attached to the dash of a vehicle. The Greensburg Police Department said on Facebook, quote, "Upon units arriving and securing the area, it was discovered that the item in question was a beef stick, still in its wrapper." Of course, there were no explosives and no threats to the public. He goes on to say, quote, "The vehicle owner removed the suspicious beef stick from the dash." Now, there are no further developments in this story, which is kind of sad. I wanted to see how this turned out. I'm somewhat suspicious that it was a prankster who put this all together, but perhaps it was just somebody who confused a beef stick for a stick of dynamite. I'm sure it could happen. Look, I'll be honest, I'm just suspicious because this happened in Kansas and not Florida. So, anyways, we're going to move into my Breaking Bad story, in which a Trenton cop's brother admitted to dealing meth. For those who haven't seen Breaking Bad, a man starts cooking meth out of his RV or something, and his brother works for the DEA. So this is kind of a real-life version of that, in which a cop's brother decided to deal meth. According to this report, the man struck a deal with the feds. However, he faces a mandatory 10-year bid and up to life imprisonment, along with $10 million in fines, which he's sentenced to later this year. Part of the deal he made was that he agreed to forfeit $97,000 in cash that was seized from his home last January. Now, the part that makes this like Breaking Bad is that the man's brother is actually in the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, which makes this, if not interesting because it's almost real-life based, at least interesting because of the dichotomy. You know, one child grows up to get rid of drugs, the other child grows up to spread drugs on the streets. It should be noted that the man arrested also used to be an officer. It's not stated why he is no longer an officer. Apparently, he became not an officer before this whole meth incident started. Perhaps he just wanted to get farther away from it as he fell down that rabbit hole. The methamphetamine rabbit hole. Anyways, the man's brother was a lead investigator in a 2-year-long $1.3 million drug bust operation in 2016, which targeted 60 different people, some of them high-ranking members of the Bloods, including leader Bobby Williams. So his brother is not only in the DEA, he is actually one of the leaders of the investigation teams. The feds agreed not to initiate any further criminal charges against the arrested man due to the fact that he pled guilty, which means although he might receive punishment as previously stated, he will not be charged against the 1,796 grams of meth which was seized from his house. Apparently the feds were already investigating the man's house when the cops raided and found the meth. Along with the large amount of meth, the cops also recovered 52 grams of cocaine, 184 grams of pot prescription pills, several vials of anabolic steroids, and about $97,000 in cash, stored in sealed boxes, wrapped in tin foil, and buried in the man's basement. This is like Breaking Bad. Once they found the man's methamphetamines, he said he was, quote, unaware that it was in his garage. He later on insisted that it was his girlfriend who stashed it there. He only fessed up once the feds walked in the room. Apparently it was a much bigger investigation than anyone was aware of. The man's defense attorney was eventually questioned on how a meth empire could go under the nose of the feds so easily, and she responded, quote, "What kind of meth empire? Leave him alone. You have false information." Alright, I feel like we've squeezed everything we could have out of that one, so now we're going to transition into a Lithuanian man who was found living in an English forest for 5 years after he went missing. It is reported that he was last seen at work in 2015. Detectives are now investigating whether or not he fled an exploitative situation, which would be like blackmail or getting involved with a mob, something like that. Anyway, it said that he was last seen leaving his work at a fruit and vegetable supplier in the town of... this is going to be my mispronunciation of the week. Chatteris, Cambridgeshire of Castleberry. That's a brilliant name. Anyways, police believe that the 35-year-old gathered with other men of his native Lithuania after work that night and was never seen again. A few weeks after the man's disappearance, police launched a murder investigation. Quote, "There were genuine concerns on whether or not he came to harm that evening. He did not return to work on Monday, 28th September 2015 as expected, but now we believe he made the decision to run away, as he had been a victim of crime, having previously been subject to exploitation. After several years, they stopped looking for the man, presuming he was dead. However, a recent trip led them to search the wooded area in a nearby town, where, quote, the man was eventually found living in undergrowth, very well concealed after having deliberately hidden and having not spoken with anyone for some time. We made the decision not to publicly announce we had found the man alive until now in order to protect him and put safeguarding measures in place. He is safe and we are working very closely with him to ensure he remains safe, but also to ensure he gets the support he needs after having lived through extremely difficult circumstances during the last 5 or more years." This article concludes with the Cambridgeshire Police urging people to visit their website in order to learn about the signs of exploitation and modern-day slavery, so they can report it and help those who may be experiencing it. Alright, time for a nice little cute story. A young dog is being called the unicorn puppy because it has an extra tail on its forehead. The puppy's name is Norwal, and he was actually found abandoned. However, after somebody found him, he found online fame. Such a bad line. Due to the fact that he looks like a unicorn. Not really, it's kind of a dopey looking. He has a tail just swooping down in the middle of his forehead. It's pretty cute, but it doesn't make him look like a unicorn. I'm not going to lie to you folks. You can go online and look it up. It is adorable in that ugly sort of way that some dogs are both hideous and cute. Apparently, a Missouri rescue group found the dog when he was only 10 weeks old. The group specializes in dogs with special needs, injuries, or abuse issues, and as a result, took him in forthwith. The rescue group wrote on Facebook, Norwal is super excited for being the poster child for, quote, special is awesome. The clinic's veterinarian said that the dog is a, quote, Dachshund mix, and the tail is likely a congenital defect. He goes on to say, quote, those usually manifest in dogs as cleft palates or extra toes, and the causes can range from environmental factors to toxins, which the puppy's mothers may have been exposed to. He finishes his statement by saying, quote, He could visit hospitals, schools, and nursing homes, showing others that being different is more than okay. It's great, in fact. Very inspirational, this puppy with a tail on its forehead. When asked if the tail could lead to any health problems, the clinic responded that the only problem is that we wish it wagged. The tail is not actually connected to any muscles or anything, it's just dangling off his forehead. It should be noted that he is not available for adoption just yet. The clinic wrote, quote, "We want him to grow up a bit more and truly make sure the tail doesn't become a bother or a problem." And finally, you can go online and look up videos of this child dog being playful and happy again, which is really nice to see. He's chewing up all sorts of things that squeak, pretending to be alive, so it's good to see that he kept his vicious animal instincts intact. Alright, I thought we were going to wrap up on that one, but we still have some time left. So I'm going to tease a story that I will do on Saturday. I'm just going to give you the headline for this one, because I think it's brilliant. It's, quote, "Hookers for Jesus wins fresh round of funding from the current presidential administration." So, a little background. Hookers for Jesus is a Las Vegas-based non-profit, and they won a grant from the U.S. Justice Department. Oh, I can't wait to get into that tomorrow, so please stay tuned. Subscribe to the GSMC Weird News podcast, and you will hear about Hookers for Jesus, I promise you. But for now, we have to go to break. Stay tuned. In the next section, I'm going to give you my top 10 historical mistakes. It'll be a heck of a laugh, so why don't you stay tuned, god dang it.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Ginger is an anti-inflammatory, which means it reduces swelling. So if you ask me, don't carry around a goddamn EpiPen, just carry around a bit of ginger. And if you have an allergic reaction, just take a bite of it. That's my medically professional opinion. Anyway, we're going to talk about my 10 historical mistakes in no particular order. Actually, there will be some particular order. It doesn't matter. Let's get into it. Number 10, Christopher Columbus. Where do I begin with the mistakes in this one? It's well known that in 1492 he sailed the ocean blue, thinking that he was less than 3,000 miles away from Japan. And he figured that once he got around Japan, he would reach the Indies, where he could take advantage of the rich spice trade. However, it turned out that Japan was about four times as far away as he thought it was. And he made this mistake in calculating the size of the globe. So that's our first mistake, is a math mistake, which led him to finding the quote-unquote free world. I'll give him this, though. For all the mistakes Columbus made, it's pretty brave what he did. Basically, it's the original version of launching to the moon. Except imagine you can't see the moon. You just hypothesize that it's there and figure that you'll reach it eventually before everybody dies on your vessel. Anyway, as we all know, eventually Columbus reached the Caribbean, and he believed that the Caribbean islands were actually the outskirts of Asia, which is why they're named the West Indies. He was promptly declared the governor of the Caribbean, and in his spare time, he searched all over South America for riches. He is also known to have enslaved many of the native people, who he incorrectly labeled as Indians. It's kind of amazing that we still call it Indians. I guess he showed up and was like, hey, look at all those Indians. And one of his crewmates was like, no, man, we're about 9,000 miles away according to my new calculator. This is America. And then I guess Columbus was like, hey, you Indians better get the hell out of here. You're not even in the right country. Anyways, in his final mistake, to his dying day, Columbus insisted that he reached Asia. As a result, America was not named after Columbus and was eventually named after an Italian explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, who was the first man to determine that what Columbus reached was not Asia, but actually an unknown world. Alright, number 9, the Titanic. So there were so many mistakes from beginning to end with this one. Many people don't know this, but the Titanic was part of 3 ships built. There were 3 ships built that were virtually identical, and only one of them was the Titanic, and it was actually the last of the 3 to sink. So these ships should not have been considered unsinkable, especially by the time the Titanic sunk. Its other 2 brothers had already sunk. So that was the first mistake, is assuming that it was an invincible ship. Anyways, they also had binoculars on board. It's just said that the lookout, was never given the keys to the locker that contained the binoculars, and he never ended up asking for them, assuming he would not need them to see any sort of iceberg that could actually do the ship damage. Of course, 4 days into the Titanic's voyage, the lookout ended up noticing an iceberg. He alerted the bridge, who then ordered the engines to be stopped. They then tried to steer around the obstacle, unfortunately giving the iceberg a chance to tear through the entire side of the ship rather than the front of the ship. So that was their, 3rd mistake? Thinking that it would be less damaging to sideswipe the iceberg rather than run into it headstrong. That's still debated today, but it's mostly well agreed upon that even if both situations would have made the ship sink, sideswiping it and tearing your ship apart on the entire side of it certainly sped up how quickly the ship sank. Now, one of the funny things about the Titanic movie, you remember that movie? It's called The Titanic. Anyways, in this movie called The Titanic, they hit this iceberg just like the Titanic in real life. I think they should be sued for copyright issues. Anyways, during the scene where they hit the iceberg, it's actually the main character's Jack and Rose's fault. The lookout people are too busy watching them making out to actually watch for icebergs. So they're too slow to respond to the giant iceberg in front of them. So that's a little nice fact for you. It's actually Jack and Rose's fault that, 1,500 people died. Alright, number 8. I'm going to start speeding this up. We're running behind. Number 8. Alexander Fleming accidentally discovers penicillin. So, long story short, this man was a researcher who made it his life goal to replace the current anti-infection care uses used in the military during World War I. And one day he got the cold and he decided to spit into a container. A few weeks later, he looked into the container and realized that half of it was completely bacteria-free. He discovered that it was a fungus that accidentally killed all the bacteria, and eventually he put this fungus near a window where it grew and grew, further revealing the fact that it would kill all of the bacteria around it. After realizing how he could isolate the fungus, he discovered that it was effective against numerous pathogens, including pneumonia, meningitis, diphtheria, scarlet fever, gonorrhea, and many more. So that was a nice little historical mistake. Number 7, Hitler's wonder weapons. I really like these stories because it's fun to hypothesize on how crazy Adolf Hitler and his Nazis really became during World War II. Unfortunately, a lot of the more scientific efforts were destroyed, so we'll never know quite how crazy of experiments they had. But some that survived were on the wonder weapons. The reason this was a mistake is because it took an unbelievable amount of resources in order to produce and even research these basic weapons. The most famous of which was the world's first ballistic missile, which carried a ton of explosives to the edge of space before descending at unstoppable supersonic speeds in order to detonate on its opponent. However, it is also known that it in fact actually had very little damage output as a weapon, especially when compared to the unbelievable resources required just to study it and produce it. Now, there are many other experiments that the Nazis had during this time. They clearly had no problem using an unreasonable amount of resources, even human resources, to get what they wanted. We'll get to the Russians later, though. Don't worry about that. Number 6. Declaring war on cats. This is a nice short one because I actually covered this a few episodes ago in my top 10 mad geniuses or something like that. Anyway, this fella, I think he was a pope, he declared war on cats, and essentially that led to an abundance of rats. And it wasn't until a few months later that the Black Plague started spreading everywhere. So it's well assumed that, although it didn't completely start the bubonic plague, the war on cats certainly supported it. Alright, number 5. The burning of the Great Library of Alexandria. This one's just genuinely sad. It was one of the vastest libraries when it came to just pure knowledge, and unfortunately nobody really knows how it was burned down, but it was probably the greatest setback in human progress the world has ever seen, if not just a great tragedy, due to the lost knowledge, the lost history, the lost generations. So in order to curb my depression, we're going to move on. Number 4. The assassination of Caesar. Now, for anybody who hasn't seen the play or read it, might not know that the assassination of Caesar was originally run in order to save the Republic. Now, anybody who has seen the play know that it didn't work out that way. Essentially what happened is basically everybody decided that they should be the rulers in lieu of Caesar's death, which basically led to mass warfare, which completely decimated the entire nation. Which is kind of funny, kind of sad, and ultimately says something about human greed and how it in fact... Number 3. I believe this is the 3rd time I've been mentioning this on a top 10 list. The Battle at Cannae. This was the Second Punic War. Rome was attacking Carthage, even though Carthage was nearly on the border of Rome. And basically, 80,000 Romans were killed against an army of only 8,000 Carthaginians. Basically, what happened is that the Carthaginians managed to surround the Romans under the brilliant command of one of the greatest leaders of all time, Hannibal of Carthage. I've mentioned this one a lot, so we're going to go ahead and move on. I really do encourage you to look up that story. It's really interesting. Anyways, number 2. The Austrian army that attacked itself. So this occurred in the Austro-Turkish War of 1787 to 1791. And without getting too deep into details, essentially what happened is an Austrian army killed and wounded 10,000 of its own men. A lot of historic writings blame this on multiculturalism, and due to the fact that it was a multicultural state at the time, many of the different military units spoke different languages in Austria. And of course, this story involves a bit of alcohol too. Basically, many thousands of scouts were sent across a river in order to find the Turkish camps, but they did not come across any. Instead, they came across some gypsies who sold them schnapps. After getting roaringly drunk, it's said that they did not return to camp in the allotted time they were given by their commander, and so their commander became worried. Therefore, he sent some infantry across to check on them. However, the infantry they sent did not speak the same language as the scouts he sent. As a result, the infantrymen shouted, "Turkey, Turkey," which meant Turks. They were asking if the scouts had found any Turks, but it instead got the scouts all riled up, thinking that the Turks were attacking. So eventually they joined the infantrymen and ran back to their own camp, where a group of a third language started to shout, "Halt, halt," which in their own language sounds like "Allah, Allah," which is what the Turks would shout when they would attack. As a result, the infantry and the scouts attacked the remaining camp, thinking that it was the Turks. 2 days later, the Turks actually did arrive at the Austrian camp, where they found 10,000 dead and wounded. Alcohol and military is a dangerous mix. Let's move on to number 1. Russia. Just Russia in general. It's a beautiful country, probably one of the most beautiful out there. But it's just kind of had a miserable history, unfortunately. First of all, there's just people invading Russia, right? You have Napoleon. That was a pretty big historical mistake. Napoleon invading Russia, where he lost about 200,000 of his military men and basically ended his conquest of Europe. Hitler had the same problem, thank God. He invaded Russia, and many people say that it is the reason he lost World War II. Beyond that, many of the mistakes rest in Russia itself, specifically with a little dude named Stalin. It's said that Lenin, the guy who was in charge of Russia before Stalin, Vladimir Lenin, on his deathbed, his final wish was that they not make Stalin the leader of Russia. And what do? They make Stalin the leader of Russia. Lenin said that he was too cruel a man to properly rule. Which brings into question why Lenin had him in the government at such a high position at the time anyways. I think he was largely to blame for this as well. Anyway, one of Stalin's most egregious military mistakes was trusting Hitler. Stalin's known to be the greatest skeptic in all of history, but for some reason he trusted Adolf Hitler, of all people. And so when Hitler invaded Russia, it actually took him about a month to actually trust his generals that they were being invaded by the Germans. He actually killed most of the generals who reported that Hitler was invading, which was quite the incentive not to actually report the truth to Stalin. Clearly just a madman and always making mistakes. Another mistake he made was issuing collective punishment among any men who deserted lines, any fire lines, which basically means that if you did not fight in the desired way that Stalin told you to fight, he would destroy your family, send them off to the gulags, and basically what this meant is that instead of following Stalin in fear, what people would do is they would just run to the German side and let them capture them. And as a result of all the other mistakes he made, about 20 million Russians died during World War II, as opposed to only 500,000 United States deaths, or 500,000 United Kingdom deaths, or 5 million Germany deaths. So they had 4 times as many deaths as Germany, which was completely attacked on both sides by the US and Russia. So pretty devastating results. About 2/3 of those deaths were said to have been from civilians, so it just absolutely devastated the Soviet Union. And that was just kind of scratching the surface of Stalin's mistakes. But unfortunately, we're out of time, so I can't go any deeper. But don't worry, there's still time for me to thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. And I also have time to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, write a nice review, because it helps us a lot. If you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, that would be fabulous. Thank you and have a good night.